there, guys, and welcome back to my channel for another deep dive and analysis into Chelsea's new manager, Enzo Maresca, ahead of the new season. As the old season has just finished, we haven't even gotten around to doing like post-season player edits and all sorts of things because we so quickly are like, okay, now we're sacking Poch. Okay, now we're hiring the new manager. Also, can I just quickly go like back to like my intro sound? Isn't that just such a satisfying sound to listen to? Josh says, big up, guys. Really enjoyed listening to Connor on playback in recent days and interacting on X. He knows his stuff. Yes, Connor knows his stuff, and he will be here any minute now. Charlie will be here in a couple of minutes as well. So we will be taking a deep dive and a deeper look into how Enzo Maresca's Chelsea will, or at least may, line up. We will take a look into that. We'll take a look at a few small bits of transfer news and transfer rumors about who Chelsea may or may not be looking at. And that is another question that we're going to be asking to Connor. Who do we need? Or rather than in terms of what names do we need, what kind of players do we need? That's going to be the interesting one. But for me, one of the most interesting thoughts and things I've been thinking about over the last few days with this Enzo Maresca situation is, how are we going to make all these very expensive players that we signed over the last 2 years work in one team? Because we're only in a conference league. None of these lot are going to be any happy playing there. So these big names, they need to be playing in the big games. And we will be talking about how, if at all, it will be possible to put them all in the same team. We are now joined by Connor. I will bring Connor in. Thank you very much for joining me once again, Connor.
Hello.
Hey, it's a few days have passed since we kind of have learned or started to figure out that it may or may not be Enzo Maresca. Obviously, last time you were on here, he was one of the few names. Now we know that it will be him, even if it hasn't officially been announced just yet. We did get the here we go yesterday. How do you feel now? Obviously, when we last spoke, I asked you to rate things out of 10, and I think you gave Maresca 7.5, same as yeah, and I think you gave the Zerbi and Xavi like a 9. So the Zerbi Maresca wasn't like your favorite pick, but he was. There was still a lot of things that you like about him. Now that we've come, a few days further into the situation, we know that he's going to get a 5-year contract, which I think baffled all of us a little bit. I'm not sure if that includes you, but I'll ask you the question now. I'll give you the answer to the chance to answer it in a second. But also, I'm sure you will have had more time to take a bit more of a closer look at what he does, how that could work with our players and everything else. So I'll start with a very on-the-spot question. Has your 7 out of 10 changed in the last few days, or are you still at a 7 out of 10 in terms of excitement or suitability for Maresca at Chelsea?
7.5, by the way. But we'll,
sorry, yeah, you said 7.5.
Yeah. Because he was ahead of McKenna, who was a 7. But I think again, when I give him that 7.5 rating, it's more so because I was worried about the other things away from tactics. Like, I knew the backlash was going to come, and I think we're already starting to see there's obviously people in the fan base that don't want this. So that's where a lot of his rating for me goes down. In terms of tactical suitability, he fits just as well as a De Zerbi or a Xavi, in my opinion, in terms of how he's going to use this squad in terms of tactical prowess. But like I say, the reason he was lower than those was because the other two at least have a bit more pedigree, whereas Maresca is currently starting out. But again, in terms of excitement, my excitement would have been higher than a 7.5 anyway. My excitement levels would have been nearer the 9 category anyway, because this is what I've wanted for this squad for so long. I've wanted this sort of football because I know, or at least from my opinion, I'll say it suits this squad down to the ground to have this sort of football being played at the team. So, and it will get the best out of the players. So yeah, excitement wise would be, like I say, higher than that 7.5 which I gave. But the 7.5, I think I stand by it, not because again, I've pretty much just said, explained, it's more so to do with the pedigree than it is the tactical fit. Tactical fit is pretty much perfect in my opinion.
Fair dues. Fair dues. By the way, hello, Mason. Hope you are well all the same. Obviously, shout out Kushel, RD, Josh in the chat, Rohan as well. We are now joined by Charlie. Charlie, thank you very much for joining me once again. It's been a hot minute, so I'm glad to see you. I'm glad to have you back on. Judging from a few of the messages that you've put in our group chat that we have, you are not exactly 1,000% sold. And neither am I. Absolutely neither am I. I've just come to the point, ever since the Here We Go has come out, I'm like, there's no point for me now sitting here and still dwelling on and crying over, we should have kept Poch, we should have done this, we should have done that. As much as I still think that, to some extent, it's pointless thinking about that now. He's gone, the new guy's going to happen. So I'm going to try to focus on positives with that. I did the same with Poch, but with Poch I had more of a lingering instinctual issue, if that makes sense. Now it's more like, to me, it's become so clear that everything that happens at this football club is decided upon, even a lot of things on the pitch is decided upon by Benedict Bali and the two sporting directors. So for me, the managerial situation is actually simplified quite drastically, because for me, it's like, okay, well, whoever the manager is, good luck to him, all the best to him, hope he does well. If he doesn't, not his fault. So, I've kind of come to that point. I'm like, even if we are absolutely dreadful and get relegated, I'm not going to blame Maresca for this. Obviously, someone in the chat the other day also told me, well, you can't say he has no blame. And that's obviously true. But there has to come a point where it's the people making the decisions about who should be here in terms of squad and in terms of management. So therefore, why should I try to blame them if they're not doing anything other than being told what to do? So Charlie, first of all, again, thank you for being here. Just elaborate for me for a moment. How do you feel about the hiring, the appointment of Enzo Maresca? And obviously, I know that I said don't dwell on Poch being gone and stuff anymore, but I haven't had you on since then. So if you want to elaborate from that perspective as well, please do.
I just think like how I could probably best sum up how this ownership have operated since they've come in. Everything just seems to be a massive gamble at the end of the day. That seems to be how they're operating. They're not operating on smart decisions or anything like that. They're just operating on huge gambles. It's like they're putting $1 million on red. It might come up on red and your quid's in, but actually there's just as much chance as it won't, and you're absolutely fucked. And that's basically, I think, how this football club's been run since this ownership have come in. Now, I've given the ownership the benefit of the doubt. I've backed their intent to spend and the way that they're prepared to invest in the team. They've shown intent to do that. You don't get ownerships that are prepared to put their hand in their pocket and spend money. So they deserve credit for that. And on the whole, generally speaking, the player identification hasn't been too bad. Yeah, there's going to be a few that don't work out, but generally speaking, there's been some very good signings. And do you know what? As much as
overdone with how many they've signed, I think that's the biggest issue.
Yeah, but and when we criticise them, and rightfully so, they deserve praise for things that they do right. So the likes of Palmer, the likes of Gusto, the likes of Petrovic, to name a few, they deserve credit for that. But where the problem lies for me is that we don't really know what they're looking for in a manager, because they've appointed. I know they weren't really involved. They kind of come partway through the Potter process, I think. But you look at the managers they've appointed, right? Graham Potter, Maurizio Pochettino, Enzo Maresca. 3 completely different types of manager, which then screams to me that, do you actually know what you want for this football club and the direction it's going in? And I have to come to the conclusion that, no, we don't. Because how do you offer Enzo Maresca a 5-year contract, Graham Potter a 5-year contract, it's both their biggest jobs in their career. But you offer someone like Maurizio Pochettino, who's experienced, Champions League finalist, has managed at PSG, managed at Tottenham and whatnot. You offer him a 2+1, and he's on some sort of like trialist contract. So,
I guess that shows you that they never wanted Poch long term. They wanted Poch to stay.
This is my point, though. They didn't believe that he was the guy. So then don't trot out these bollocks lines that you trot out every time a manager's appointed that, he's the outstanding candidate, thorough and exhaustive process. We believe he's the guy that's going to take us forward. We've heard this after Potter, we've heard this after Poch, and now we're hearing it again. Like, how can anyone take these guys' words as truth when every single action they've done since they've been here goes against everything they've said in regards to managers? You hear they're obsessed with finding the next Arteta, finding the next whatever, the next Xabi Alonso or whatever manager you're looking for. And what they don't seem to understand is patience is required. Bowley speaking out in Qatar a couple of weeks back, our patience is looks like it's paying off at the end of season form. I know, by the way, Bowley's not involved in any of this football and stuff. He's only got a 30% hold. So when I keep seeing people slamming Bowley for stuff, this is not on him. The main guys...
Supposedly, Bowley wanted Amorim, so make of that what you will.
Yeah, maybe he did. But this is my point. Like, Bowley's talking about patience, and then 10 days later, the manager's gone. So like, I don't really understand it. At the end of the day, look, as you touched on, every single manager and every single player that comes through the door they'll have 100% backing and support from me from day one until it's physically not viable to do it anymore. But I think particularly with Maresca, particularly with a rookie appointment, at the end of the day, the higher ups have to be held accountable. There's no way I'm going to blame Maresca for taking the job. Of course you take it. You know, you don't know if you're going to be offered this again. It's a no-brainer you take it. And it's not his fault that they sounded him out, and it's absolutely not his fault for taking it. But I just don't want us to get to a situation where he's just used as a human shield to deflect all responsibility and accountability from the people who are above that are making the decisions. And
see, that's my only hope, right? I said this to Ollie on our stream the other day, that because, as at least the public has been told, obviously we never know quite how true things are, but that Eghbali didn't seem to necessarily be fully sold on Maresca, and they kind of had to convince him of it, and he might have preferred someone like the Zerbi. If now this Maresca appointment goes badly, my hope would be that the sporting directors will also have to suffer the consequences from that. And well, then they have to. Because if Maresca also fails, right, then you're like, at some point, well, the people making those decisions clearly don't know what they're doing. So then it's pointless changing the manager or changing the squad again. You need to change the people, you know, that put the management and the squad together. So because they went with their choice, I have a little bit of hope that if it doesn't work out, we might change them too. So that's why I can see that as a positive side effect, if that makes sense. I don't know about you.
They should have gone with Poch anyway. But but at the end of the day, right? But there's an interesting point here. I know there's obviously there'll be break clauses in this 5-year contract, but this is their guy, and they're going to want to back him. So what happens then next season? Say if it comes to sort of March, April time, and we're 6th or 7th, and the Champions League is not looking likely to qualify for it, which is, by all accounts, a target which Maresca needs to get to. What happens then? Because this is the sporting director's appointment, right? And they know that if they call for him to go, or they recommend that he should be replaced, they know that by doing that, they're finished as well. So what happens there? Do they sort of be honest with themselves, or do they push to keep Maresca in a job, regardless of how badly he's doing, to also save their own backs? Like, this is the problem. This is the situation we're going to be in right now, is that Maresca, for me, regardless of, even if we come 10th next season, right, and we win nothing, Maresca still needs to be there, because it just makes a complete mockery of what we're doing as a football club. You can't just keep starting again every 12 months. At some point, you have to back a manager, and you have to stay true to your word and believe what you're saying. Because right now, I think these guys are basically just saying a load of stuff that evidently they don't believe in, and they think that they want people to hear. I'd much rather than just be honest and say, look, we're taking a gamble here. This might work out, it might not. But contract length for me, look, you can look at it and think, oh, why has it been offered so long? Ultimately, how many managers see out a contract? Next to none. All it dictates is how big his payoff's going to be at the end of the day.
And even then, we don't know the details if there aren't any other sort of clauses. If you don't make top 4, you only get this much of a payout, stuff like this. Like, just because it's a 5-year contract doesn't necessarily mean he gets a 4-year payout if we sack him next summer.
I just think that ultimately, like, the positivity that we felt surrounding the end of the season under Poch, and that the difference in feeling between the end of the Lampard season in 22-23 compared to the feeling that we had at the end of the season just gone was so different. But it now feels like, with Poch going, with an unknown in Maresca coming in, that all that positivity and all that positive feel around the club has kind of gone, and now we've got no idea what to expect. Whereas if Poch had stayed, I know he's gone and there's no point talking about it, you feel like we were building and the top 4 was a absolute realistic target. And if Poch didn't make the top 4 this coming season, then he had every right for him to go. But now you look at it and you think, well, yes, it's Chelsea, and yes, you want to be back in the Champions League. But if you want to be back in the Champions League next season, don't appoint a manager that's got 1 season of senior coaching experience, if that's what you want. If you want someone to come in next season and win trophies and get you into the Champions League, don't appoint a rookie manager.
That's the problem, isn't it? Like, supposedly, that's what, like you said, the target is, or the targets are, qualifying for the Champions League, whichever way that may be. I say whichever way that may be, because we're not in the Europa League, unless, and that is a small possibility until Monday, Ineos need to, the owners now of Manchester United and Nice need to somehow restructure one of the clubs to allow both of them to actually feature in the Europa League.
Oh, man, they'll restructure. They'll find something.
Yeah, and I completely agree. But obviously, the current situation is still they need to change something. And if they do not change something to satisfy UEFA's demands, then one of them, presumably Manchester United, because they qualified after. I don't really know why one would be picked before the other. I have no idea. But there is, I guess, that small chance. But let's absolutely not bank on it. But on top of it, they apparently also want to win the Club World Cup. I'm like, excuse me, have you seen who else is playing there? Like, this ain't the Club World Cup from 2 years ago anymore. This ain't like a bunch of Saudi teams and one decent Brazilian team. That's not how it goes anymore, boys. Like, what's happening? What do you mean expect to win the Club World Cup? You can already throw them all in the bin again. Honestly, I have no idea what they are doing. It's ridiculous.
But the Club World Cup's not until the summer of 25. So who's to say he's even going to be here then?
Well, his contract will probably go for including the Club World Cup. Well, his contract is 5 years, but it's an interesting question. The whole Club World Cup will change how a lot of things go anyway. Like, will the players get their break before the Club World Cup? Will they get it after the Club World Cup? Will we do pre-season before the Club World Cup? I have no idea. I have no idea. It will be very interesting. It's something that changes how the season runs compared to the last. God knows.
I also think the Conference League is now perhaps something maybe Maresca could have done without, in terms of that there's going to be that pressure now that he almost has to win it. And I look at the Conference League from a footballing perspective for Chelsea and think it's very much lose-lose, because if we win it, you don't get much credit because we're the best team in it by a mile. And if we lose it, it's a total embarrassment. So there's very little to gain. Yeah, but there's very little to gain from the Conference League for us.
The only positive you can gain from it is giving players that might otherwise never get minutes. But even then, Europa League would have been better.
Yeah. But do I look at Maresca and think, is this the guy to come in and win us the Conference League and, get back into the Champions League in a first season? I just think that's a massive ask. I think it's too big an ask.
Honestly, I think the Conference League we should win that even if we didn't have a manager. If I'm honest,
we should.
Especially that nowadays there is no drop down from the competition above. So no Champions League drop down to Europa League and no Europa League drop down to the Conference League. So the teams that will be in it starting in September are the only teams that will be in it. If we don't win that, well, then we should just cancel a whole club. It doesn't matter if we have a manager or not. We need to be winning that. But yeah, it's a lot of things. And I agree with you very much so, Charlie. Not necessarily that they don't have any idea. I think they do always think they have an idea. Then they create problems for themselves. And then they need to, scramble basically to find solutions to the problems that they created themselves. And that's kind of what I feel like it's happening at the moment. They could have sacked Poch earlier in the season, where a large majority of the fan base would have been perfectly happy with that. Large majority. Now, sure, we could have hired Maresca, I guess, at that point too. But then you wouldn't have hired him as a championship winning manager. You would have hired him as just a championship manager. So even worse, I suppose. But then if you wait a year, Maresca, there's a good chance he would have done the same journey as Winton Company, going up, but with a team nowhere near good enough, trying to play that type of football in the Prem, probably going back down again, and then we'd look like the same mugs that Bayern Munich look like now, hiring a relegated manager. I do quickly want to say this in terms of what you said much earlier, Charlie, where Josh says, I hear people say this in terms of how high the risk is and stuff, but what is considered risk-free? We can't get Pep Guardiola. Varying degrees of risk, I would agree. And I do hear that point. Which appointment could we have made that wouldn't have been a risk? Realistically, obviously you could have kept Poch, but outside, that's exactly the point, right? Would the Zerbi have been a risk? Yes. Would Maresca have been? Is Maresca a risk? Yes. Would Amorim have been a risk? Also, yes. Do you know what I mean? Would, even in theory, obviously that would have never happened, but even in theory, even if you rehire Thomas Tuchel, purely for the relationship between him and the higher-ups, that in itself is also a risk. So, there wasn't really a hire out there that wouldn't have been a risk, but I do want to take it back to Connor here, and obviously I said to you earlier, you had a little bit more time to do a little bit more research, but it also goes for me. So I did a bit of reading up myself, read a few articles, watched a few videos, and one thing that does concern me is maybe the wrong word, but obviously people will know Leicester City was Maresca's second first team head coach job. The first one was at Parma in Serie B, where he was essentially hired to get them promoted. After 14 games and 6 months, he got sacked for bad performances. That does worry me a little bit. And now people will say, what I find very interesting is that people see me going to be very much sticking to exactly what he did at Leicester. But then I found out he didn't do at Leicester exactly the same thing he did at Parma. So why are people so 100% sure that he will do the same thing at Chelsea that he did at Leicester? Because if he changed between those two, there's a chance he changes between Leicester and us. Now, obviously, Parma didn't go well. So you could argue there was more of a necessity for him to change a little bit of what he's trying to do, rather than with Leicester, where he did at least achieve everything he could have achieved in winning the league, in the championship with them. But still, it does concern me a little bit that his first job didn't even last 15 games. Connor, I'm not sure if you've done any research and know much about what exactly went wrong at Parma, but even if you didn't, does that at all put a little bit of a concern within you? Because my worry is then, and I was speaking about this to Wally, the problem with these kind of inexperienced managers is that you don't know how to deal with bad situations when things don't go well. And even if we do finish 4th or 5th or 6th and win the Conference League next season, there will be periods of the season where it won't go well. We all know that will happen. That happens in every season. Even when we win the league, we sometimes have spells where it's not as great, right? Think of the contest season. We lost fucking 3-0 to Arsenal, still won the league. But that's the problem. Like, the only proof in the pudding we have of him ever dealing with things going wrong ended with him getting sacked in 6 months. So that's why that's the part I worry. I don't worry so much. These kind of tactically astute managers, and he clearly is that, I don't worry about them when things go well. You know, everybody's going to be happy. Everybody's going to be buzzing about the tactics, blah, blah, blah. But when things don't go well, the stadium not being behind it, we've learned it under Maurizio Sarri. Chelsea fans need an impetus to create atmosphere. Passing it around the back, waiting for an opening, is not going to create that impetus for the fans to make atmosphere, right? So therefore, we already know there's going to be more than a dozen of home games next season where it's going to be quieter than the library until we score a goal in the 80th minute. And that's going to be a bit of a problem. And especially with a certain few sentences, statements he made at Leicester, is like, if anyone has a problem with the way I do things, I'm gone tomorrow. I mean, like, with that approach, he's not going to get people on his side when things go badly. So that's my worry, that he might be so sure of his own idea that he doesn't realize that he might be the only one that's that sure of it, and he needs to help other people through the tough times and not just say, well, I'm doing what I'm doing and it will work one day. Like, even with Sarri, we came third, won the Europa League, but the boos for Sarri, the boos for Jorginho, the outrage after losses to Man City and Bournemouth, there's a good chance things like that happen again. And now, obviously, Sarri didn't survive, but in hindsight, a lot of us said he should have survived. So, kind of sorry to go on such a monologue before I actually ask you to reply. But yeah, like I say, is that a worry for you as well, that how he will deal with crisis, I guess, but also on the topic of Parma more specifically?
Yeah, starting with Parma, I think the thing is, even he sort of mentioned, is the buy-in wasn't quite there straight away. So obviously, again, that was his first job, and he didn't quite have the players to execute what he wanted. It took a little bit too long, and then even, like I say, too long, because he only got, like you say, like 14 games, and then he was gone. So he didn't even really have the time to implement it properly. At Leicester, the difference was when he came in, it supposedly everybody bought in really quickly. They felt out of their depth with some of the things that he was teaching them, but they were all involved and they wanted to learn. They bought into the process and it worked. So in the sense of, like, and again, it's important to note that people think that he just sort of, like you say, he had his tactics at Parma, and then he came in and he had a slightly different set of tactics at Leicester. But he actually started the season at Leicester playing Pereira as a left back and inverting him from the left. So even throughout the season, they changed. It's just, again, it's more so to do with the base of what he wants to do, like his actual principles, rather than exactly how it's lined up. Like I said before, I wouldn't be surprised if the right back holds width and you see Caicedo and Enzo as a pivot, because again, it's still the same. He's still creating the same shapes, but it's just a different way of forming it. And then
exactly.
You play with
and if you have different personnel, like that's what surprised me so much about like people that write for the Athletic, like a very much a well-renowned sporting outlet, and their Leicester correspondent just write an article saying he will do exactly this, and there is no way he goes away from it. And then it just makes me question, well, if even the Athletic can't hire proper journalists, how can I expect Chelsea to hire proper sporting directors? I mean, maybe just no one does anything properly anymore. Let's just everything be done by AI. I mean, because like you just said, he would have different strengths of players. So it would be totally illogical if he just adamantly stuck to, like, did it exactly the same way. Like you said, the shapes and the formation roughly will very likely be the same. But if you have different profile of players, you might put different players in different positions. So I always found that a bit strange, especially with like Ricardo Pereira at Leicester, obviously the right back inverting. Technically, he's probably one of their best players they have in the squad. Like, he was quite, highly rated a few years ago, and everyone was a little bit surprised how he ended up at Leicester and has still stayed there, even with their relegation. But he's clearly a very good player that probably is at a higher technical standard than a lot of the rest of the squad. So it makes sense to make him be one of the important people in midfield. But Chelsea have plenty of people of that kind of technical quality. So why would it necessarily have to be the right back? I'm not saying it can't be, but I just don't understand why certain people seem to be so adamant that it 1000% will be. Now, I don't know. I just find that a little bit surprising. But let's get through a couple of pieces of, like, I guess, bits and bobs that have come out before we get into a tactical talk and about how Chelsea could line up. Now, supposedly Chelsea have been won over by Maresca's detailed plans for Enzo Fernandez. Maresca was understood to present multiple setup shifts that he believes would get the best out of Enzo Fernandez. And for me, this is already the first big sign that he's not necessarily going to do things exactly like he did at Leicester, because at Leicester he didn't have an Enzo Fernandez. Now, you could argue Harry Winks, maybe in terms of broadly speaking, if you compare their squad and our squad, there are certain similarities between Harry Winks and Enzo Fernandez in terms of style of player for the team. But they only had Harry Winks. We don't only have Enzo, we have Enzo and Caicedo and Lavia. So, like, there's ways to make them work. And we learned that the ownership told Poch essentially, make Enzo and Caicedo together work. So, because I've literally seen people say they think Enzo could suffer, and where's Enzo even going to play, and all these kind of theories. I'm like, if Poch was told he needs to make those two work, you can be damn flipping sure that Maresca will be told that he needs to make those two work. And if he didn't have a plan for that, we wouldn't have hired him in the first place. So that I do find a bit silly. Like Cyril says, smash that like button, ladies and gentlemen, and hit that subscribe button as well. That would be massively appreciated. But I mean, I'll go with you first again, Connor. First of all, what do you think when you read these kind of things? Like, is this just media waffle in your mind, or do you take his word for, do you take their word for it and okay, he has some sort of fancy plan for Enzo, or do you think it's just I don't know. What is your reaction when you read that as a guy that's very much so into tactics and the details?
I don't know if it's more the hope that's got me thinking that way, but I genuinely buy into that idea because, like I said, with him and the way he likes his players to be, his technical profiles, Enzo is such an Enzo player, Enzo Maresca player, in the sense of he will love Enzo Fernandez. He will be the absolute core of this team, and he should be. Like I said, a lot of people are saying that he could be that Roman 8 that is a bit more creative and he has to make those box-to-box runs. Like you said with Winks, I don't see a world that Enzo isn't the base player in this, because I think he's so important to exactly what Maresca wants us to do that I think it'd be silly to not have him as the 100+ touch man, which again people refer to.
So what you're essentially telling me, we've now hired another manager who would have really loved Jorginho still being here. So that 10 million just gets more and more worth it. Absolutely fantastic to have it. I still wouldn't have loved all of our midfielders to learn from Jorginho, but no, 10 million.
I will say that people probably don't like it, but I do think Enzo has a much I'd rather have Enzo.
No. I'm not saying Jorginho is any better than Enzo by no means, but I'm saying in principle, style of player, that's kind of who Maresca. He's essentially looking for a regista. Let's be real.
And he's an experienced version. So again, like you say, you could have had Jorginho teaching him. He could have hit it, in certain games, he'd be helpful around. So yeah, that was silly at the end of the day. I think everybody sort of knew at the time it was probably not worth the payoff that we got. It wasn't so big that it had to be done. You probably could have just kept him around. But yeah, that is exactly what I think he's going to be. Pretty much, if somebody's going to have those 100 touches, you want it to be Enzo. You're going to get the best out of him, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's true that he's gone to them with a plan. Because, like I say, I think genuinely, if you've got midfielders like Enzo and Caicedo, I don't care what people say about the height and physicality of the Premier League. You've got two exceptional talents there. Probably not worth what you paid for them, but who is nowadays? And I say this all the time. But
other than Jackson and Palmer.
Yeah, like when you pay, when you pay above the odds, like obviously, like £100 million players, they're not going to be worth £100 million. That's just silly. But these players, if you build around them and you get them clicking, which is what the ownership want, the team goes up 3, 4, 5 levels, because it is that drastic, in my opinion. If you get Enzo playing exactly how he should be, he is a special player, and I that's my biggest positive, my biggest hope from this switch of football, is that people finally realise just how good a player you've got there if you make things click around him. So, and it literally, like I say, I'm not over exaggerating in my opinion, I think it takes us up levels if you get him playing.
Yeah, no, and so do I. Like, one of the things that I certainly, was one of the standout things when you read up about Maresca, or listen up about him, I guess, is that the most important part of the pitch is the midfield, which is like, it could not be more. I don't know why I've got a frog in my throat, but which could not be more different to what we experienced this past season, where every single game, no matter whether we played a championship team, whether we played Burnley and Luton, or whether we played Man City and Arsenal, every single game, our midfield got overrun. That doesn't necessarily mean our midfield was always bad, but we never managed to have any control in midfield, ever. And when I say control, I don't mean have the ball and pass it around. On the ball, you always have control because you have the ball. I'm talking about having control while you don't have the ball. And we had never any of it. Like, they played through our midfield, and then our defenders had to do, like, defend against 3 to 5, depending on how attacking and how quick in transition the opponents were, attackers all by themselves. And then are we surprised that the mistakes happen because they're under ginormous pressure, which shouldn't happen in the first place? But when I take this to you, Charlie, and I ask you the same question I asked to Connor, what is your reaction when you read a headline like this, or a tweet about an article like this? Detailed plans for Enzo Fernandez. Do you see this as media waffle, or are you a bit like Connor, where you're like, maybe less sure, but more so hoping that at least one of the positives out of this will be that we actually use the areas of the pitch where we spent the most money to actually try to make it look half decent?
For me personally, like, I can't believe the Enzo Maresca PR train over the last sort of few days. It's been relentless. I'm not saying that, there shouldn't be press for him, because of course there's going to be, but like the amount of things that are coming out, and like how people are impressed by the bare minimum. It's almost like he's turned up to an interview for a big job, and you get things coming out saying, oh, they were really impressed with his detailed knowledge of the squad. It was like, are we being serious here, that we're impressed that he's turned up with the knowledge of the squad for a job that he's being interviewed for, that he might end up getting? We're impressed by bare minimum knowledge here. You would expect him to turn up with ideas of how to get the best out of the most expensive players a club have invested in. So this is not something I think that he should be being praised for, or like we should be celebrating.
I guess just praise the comparison to Poch, who didn't find a way to make it work.
But these are just bare minimum things. But ultimately, like, I'm not saying that. But again, would we, if Enzo was fully fit last season and wasn't playing for 6 months with a hernia, would we have seen Poch get more out of him? What was it? I'm not saying like it was purely, there's no blame on Poch, but how much of Enzo's performance was down to the hernia issues that he was playing through with injections, compared to how much of it was purely on Poch? I suspect that it's somewhere in the middle. So, look, it's clear that the club want Enzo to work out. They spent a lot of money on him. I don't believe in like higher ups are involved in team selection, but I fully subscribe to the thought that when big money signings are made, there is a pressure from up above to play them and to make it work, because it almost has to work because of the money that's been spent. So, look, as Connor touched on, I think we probably will see Fernandez operating in a deeper role, because at the end of the day, you want Enzo on the pitch in the areas where he's going to be on the ball most. The more touches you can get of the ball to him, then the more likely he's going to have an impact on the game. You only have to look at games where he's had a high volume of touches and how much he's influenced the game. So it's about getting on the ball enough. Look, I think he's capable of doing both roles. Can he do that box-to-box 8 role? Yes, he potentially can. One slight doubt I'd have is, and again, let's see what he's like after being fully recovered from this injury. Does he have the athleticism to play that box-to-box role? Are his defensive capabilities good enough as well in that box-to-box role? Can we trust him to get up and down the pitch and do that?
The thing that will be different is if we have 70% of the ball every game, that will be required a lot less often.
But in the
he will, rather than having to sprint back 17 times in a game, he might only do it 8 times. And then his athleticism will also be much easier to deal with it.
I agree on that front. But what about the games where we're not going to have high volumes of possession? When you go away to Man City,
we're going to lose 6-0 like we did on the Sarri.
We're not going to. But this is the point, though. What happens in those types of games? It's all very well saying, he's not going to have to do that because we're going to have the majority of the possession in certain games. Yeah, fine. But in the big games, they're not. What happens when we go away to City, away to Arsenal, away to Liverpool? Big games away from home where our record has been poor in recent years, and we're not going to have much of the ball. And he has to do those things. I'm not saying he can't do it. I'm just saying I've yet to see whether he's got the athleticism to perform that box-to-box role. I think there's no problem playing him in the deeper role. And I think that's probably where you're going to get the best out of him, for sure.
The thing is, the box-to-box role becomes a bit different when you have 2 people that are always at the base. Like a box-to-box role with only one base means you need to get further back and quicker, and it's more important than if there's 2 ahead of the centre backs, regardless of Enzo making it back in time.
I think generally speaking, against like sort of your standard teams, that's all right. But I would perhaps say, certainly in the bigger games away from home where you're not going to dominate the ball, maybe that's something where Enzo in an 8 role, box to box kind of thing might not be as good. But ultimately for me, I agree with Connor. I think that to get the best out of him, you need him in a position where he's going to be on the ball the most. And I think in that deeper role, picking the ball up from the centre-backs, with his range of passing that he's got, his quality that he's got on the ball, and him starting the attacks, that for me is where he's going to be most effective. But again, that doesn't mean to say he can't do the other role. I just think that's where Maresca may well get the best out of him. But yeah, in terms of what's up on the screen, I think it's normal to go into a job interview with plans on how to get the best out of the most expensive players, because there's going to be that expectation that you need to get the best out of these guys because we've invested a lot of money in them. You need to make this work.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. A few people in the chat saying, didn't he play box-to-box for Argentina, or he always plays box-to-box for Benfica and Argentina? While that may or may not be true, less so, I think, for Argentina. For Benfica, it was a bit of a, mix of things, I would say. But for Argentina, for sure. But the thing you've got to consider, and I think what Charlie's kind of getting at is, it's one thing doing this in an international tournament, and it's another thing doing that in the Premier League, which the biggest thing that the Premier League has over any other type of football, even over the Champions League, is the level of intensity. And what level of intensity means, the transitions are quicker. So that's more when this kind of athleticism is more put into question that Charlie's talking about, compared to when you're talking about in a World Cup or being by far the best team in your league, or by far one of the 2 or 3 best teams in your league, like Benfica is, which we're not. But in terms of what Charlie said, for me, if a manager is great and a manager is like, okay, I have, like, if he did get Enzo to do the 8-bit, which we don't know about, maybe he'll do the deeper bit, hopefully, or whatever, right? But then you'd think, okay, but when we play Man City or Arsenal, I'm not going to start Enzo here. I'm going to say play Caicedo there, for example, and Lavia in the pivot. And only once we've actually made it to becoming one of the best teams in a year or 2 or 3's time, then we can go toe-to-toe with these types of teams, and then you leave Enzo there. So then it's like, but while we're not at their level, you play someone else. Like, that would be what I would hope a good manager does, but we will only have to wait and see whether he will end up doing that or not. I saw someone say earlier, which I thought was a bit of a harsh way of saying it, and Charlie is the Riera's representative on this stream. To hear positivity, you need to seek out the tacticos. For me, it's not about the Riera comment, that's kind of irrelevant. I'm more talking about the whole, in this case, it's actually true that you do need to look at the tactics for the positives. And different managers are different. Like when you look at Poch and you want to look at positives, You don't look at tactics because that's where the negatives are. But he has positives in other sides of the game. But the manager like Maresca, he has the positives there. So for me, I've always found this. I'm a very logically thinking person, right? So I always, if I have an explanation and an idea of why something could work, I find that much easier to get behind than lemons. Do you know what I mean? If you're all going on vibes and trying to get everyone be more confident and do your thing, express yourself. I'm like, well, yeah. But if it was that easy to express yourself, no one would need a manager. So, that's why I find it a bit easier to get behind things from that perspective. But it's just a different kind of looking for positives in a manager than you do for certain other managers. And I do think that Common is right with that in that sense. We've spoken about Enzo enough, but shout out you, Jem. No worries at all. We appreciate you. I just wanted to quickly bring this up before we get to the lineup screen. Incoming coach Enzo Maresca will be given time and patience as long as he produces a base level performance and does not rock the boat too much with the club's hierarchy. I'll go to you, Connor, just quickly. You were nodding and agreeing earlier when Charlie was saying, even if we come 10th, which hopefully we obviously won't, but even if we come 10th, we're now in a position that this manager needs to stay and we need to build on something, because it was all well and good changing the manager every year and searching for quick success while you have a good team, while you have a strong team that is full of leaders, that is full of men, that is full of proven players. It's a very different scenario to when you have a completely inexperienced and very young squad, and then you change the manager every year, because that's never going to work, because you need to let these players start to gel together. And I think much more than Poch doing anything so drastically different, the reason why the second half of the season was so much better than the first half of the season is because a squad that it felt like we rolled a few dice and decided, okay, this is our new squad now. And these players had never met each other before last summer's preseason. Cole Palmer only joined basically in September. Cole Palmer didn't know any of these lot beforehand. So obviously it's going to take a little bit of time until certain connections, and that goes defensively, in build-up or in attack, until connections start to build, until chemistry starts to build. And I still feel that this is the biggest thing why we got better as the season got on. Not because Poch did anything better. Or, I just think, okay, we signed talented players, they start to know each other, they play better. Shock. Do you know what I mean? So that's not exactly surprising. But base level of performance, obviously this is media talk, I get it, but this is already where I have a problem with it. They are already, again, top 4 expectations, winning the Club World Cup expectations. If that's your expectations, you need to hire different managers. It doesn't work together. And that's the thing that worries me and concerns me so much. I don't know about you, Connor, but how do you feel about that?
With the base level performance thing, and I sort of spoke about this with a few different people now, I think I've said it before, I think Pochettino would have been clever to keep this season, and I don't think he'd have been sacked on the basis of finishing 6th. I think they have no issues with that idea. I think where that fallout has happened is he doesn't agree with the path we're taking, and we're not going to change the path we're taking. And as I said, again, multiple times throughout the season, when a lot of people were Poch out and I actually kind of stuck up for him, I do think Poch was good for the transition phase, but he was never going to take us any further than...
But it should have been a bit longer. One season isn't long enough almost with how much we changed.
Yeah, next season would have been perfect if we'd have got top 4 with him next season and then moved on. But again, saying that, people, if he got 4th next season, you'd have had a massive outcry if he did get sacked. And again, I understand that. But for me, that's his ceiling. He gets you to a top 4 club. He sustains things. He manages the players, especially in a young group, and he gets everybody a bit more just fluid and like you said, gelled in together. So that's why I think
he is good at creating a team and a good bond and stuff within each other, which I do think absolutely. We will benefit from Poch's work from that perspective.
So do I think we massively. Will. But I have a lot of time for him in that sense. But I do think that's as far as he could have taken us in that 4th place, sort of gelling the side. And then I think it comes to the fact of, you do need this sort of manager because this squad was always being built in this way. So you can probably assume the likes of Gallagher and that will probably go because that's probably what Poch didn't agree with, right? So in that sense, but when you said I was nodding along with the 10th place comment, absolutely in my opinion, because like I said, next season would have been a smarter time to do it. But this manager, at least the way I've paid things in my head, has always been the manager. The one after Pochettino had to be the guy that fit the group in terms of tactical base levels and what you want to see from the squad and get the best out of each player. So now that they've made that choice with Maresca, there's no going back now, because if this now falls and they get rid of him, I don't know where you go, because if you go for an experienced manager in a different route,
well, you go for the next League One winning manager, obviously.
Like if they make different, like, I just can't see anything now in terms of
next, or they go to Jose. It's like, okay, rip it all up. This didn't work. Let's do different approach.
And that's the issue. Like, that's what you said it right there. Rip it all up. That is pretty much what happens if you get rid of Maresca now. You are basically
and honestly, doesn't it feel like they already did that twice? I feel like they ripped everything up when they sacked Poch and got when they sacked Potter and got Poch instead. That is already like the whole principle. Like Charlie said it earlier, you gave Potter a 5-year contract with like all this back and all this that. He didn't even have a preseason, unlike Poch, and you sacked him in what, March, April, 2nd of April, whatever it was. Like, and I understand why we sacked him. I think we all were at a point at that point. Like, it was so bad. Like, this season felt bad again, right? But when you then actually look at how many games we lost last season and how many games we lost and won this season, it's night and day, even though we're still bad. Do you know what I mean? But that's how bad last season was, that it's still night and day difference. So I understand why Potter had to go. But the problem was just you sacked Tuchel too soon. So that's what I meant earlier when I said they create problems for themselves that they then scramble to try and find solutions to. Because if you didn't sack Tuchel that soon, you could just kept Tuchel, then you let all these players go, signed all the new players, and then brought them new players in with the new manager, that would have been fine. But you brought the new manager in before the players all left, and then were surprised that they didn't all try that hard, and were surprised that it was kind of going downhill. But then you didn't give that manager long enough to actually see the positives from him with a new squad, because you got the complete opposite end of a manager in Poch, who doesn't understand tactics and is about lemons. I'm not saying he's necessarily in the grand scheme of things a bad manager, but he's not a tactically astute manager. And when you sign players like a Mudryk, whose clear deficiencies seem to be understanding the game, then you don't need to bring a manager in who's about vibes and says, express yourself. You need a manager that teaches him how to be most effective. And that's what I mean. Like, they signed players that didn't suit the manager, and when we have good players, they want to sell them even though the manager wants to keep them. Someone in the chat said earlier, how does this fit Gallagher? I do actually think Gallagher would fit Maresca ball much better than people think, but he won't be here. Like, it's not even there's no point in even considering it. Why do you think Poch has gone? Since Poch has gone, there's no chance Gallagher will be here next season. There's no chance at all. There's a small chance with Chalobah, because Chalobah has 5 years left of his contract, so he could force it. I mean, I know Gallagher could too, but Gallagher only has 1 year left, right? So that's not going to happen realistically. So, but anyway, enough talking about that. Let's actually talk about how we could be lining up next season, because I do find it very interesting. We do have a little bit of a tactical board for once, which is quite nice. This is basically what Connor sent me, which Connor kind of created. Or
what is this?
It's called tactical-board.com. It's quite good. I only found it just before the stream as well. And I sent it to Connor. I was like, yeah, I found it.
Feels like we're doing our UEFA Z license right now.
This is what I use for my videos.
Look at this. I could do arrows and everything. Where's the arrow?
Yeah, mate. Talk me through it. A little coaching course here.
Yeah.
Literally. It was supposed to work, but it didn't.
Yeah, you put the arrow on the right, and then you put that to a line. So where it's the arrow, where you've got, go over to the left. Where, do you see where the select arrow is? Yeah, there. Then go up to a line. Find the line on that row.
That one?
So below the pencil. Yeah. Click that, and then you can draw a line.
Yeah, mate. Get a couple of arrows going on them fullbacks, mate, and then we can pretend we know what
basically
fullbacks. Yeah, get one of them. Yeah.
Now I just need to always try to figure out how I remove things again. So
if I draw on the screen, because I sent it to you, I don't. It probably won't come up with it. No, it doesn't. Okay, I just thought I'd check that.
No, maybe if we had it linked and I was like logged in and everything, maybe it would.
Yeah,
but
sure.
It shamefully doesn't. Let me just quickly move it around a little bit to what maybe the starting formation would look like, and then we talk about how it would maybe shift in possession. I guess like this, we'll talk about that in a minute, how we think things will or will not shift around, because I have a few concerns. I have a few concerns about who is actually going to be good at certain things. So most likely it's either going to be this 4-2-3-1, or it's going to be with Enzo at the base, a 4-3-3, or with Caicedo at the base, a 4-3-3, and you just do it the other way around. Whether then Palmer actually plays as a number 8 or plays as a right winger, and then you either put like Chukwuemeka here, or you put like, in theory, if you would stay like Gallagher here, or theoretically you could play Lavia as the 6 and put Caicedo there. I think that would also be something to consider. That is something we'll have to wait and see just how it goes. For now, just for ease's sake and for the players that Connor put in here, we'll keep it as a 4-2-3-1 because that makes it a bit easier, I feel like, to explain from the get-go. But Connor, the principles, right? The principles are, there's always, other than when you play a lot weaker teams than yourself, you're going to have a 3 at the base, a 2 in front of that, and attack with 5. Whether that you want to call it a 3-2-5 or a 3-2-4-1, kind of irrelevant. But essentially, you have 5 attackers, 5 players whose main role is to, not main role is to just stop transitions. But once you've made it to the final third, you leave 4 to 5 players back to make sure you don't get absolutely destroyed on transition. But how does the build up? Because we've all seen this, I think now, whether you have the Caicedo push up or whether you have Enzo push up, doesn't really matter for the principle, right? Then you have your back 3. They defend like a back 3. The wide centre backs in this case, they have to defend the wide areas. The wingers probably do have to do a bit of defensive, helping out when you get overloaded in transition. But how does the build up work? Like, is it the centre back passing it straight out? Is it like creating passing lanes? Is it creating angles? Is it creating patterns? How would you like to best explain it to people that may not really be sure what we're going to end up seeing here?
Yes, so there's a lot of different things. So the first thing you can sort of talk about is that the goalkeeper will push up and sort of make that back 4. So Colwill would be alongside the goalkeeper as like a back 2 centre backs, like that. And then the other 2 sort of stay in their positions to hold a little bit more width to circulate it. And then that's when the pivot, Enzo and James, like really narrows. They'll be like even closer together than you have them now, for example.
And deeper as well, or do they stay like here?
Yeah, a bit deeper. Like, it depends sort of where they'd be. So in this scenario, with the goalkeeper being here, obviously you can now put the 8s, say Caicedo and Palmer, slightly to the right, like slightly wider though.
Okay, a bit wide.
So
you create a bit of a 4-2-2 almost.
Yeah, and you're sort of like, the idea here is to find these angles for Colwill or the goalkeepers to like split the line. So like once that, so obviously they're circulating as a 6, and then the idea then is once it goes into one of those like higher up,
did you need a centre back circulating as a 6?
Yeah, as a six group. Yeah, so the 2 6s.
Okay, so yeah, I get you.
Yeah, so they're circulating between that group. And then when you can then make that split and pass into those 8s who are providing. So when it's narrow like that, they're in those gaps where you can see Colwill is. That's why I want Colwill as the central centre back in this like example, because he then has the best angle to find those balls through to, say, Caicedo, who you've got on the left there. He's got that best angle to beat that gap through the narrow pivot and make that ball into Caicedo. So that's like obviously the first bit of build up, and you're through the lines by then. So obviously then everybody pushes up except the goalkeeper. He can return back to goal once you've got to there. But that's like a mainstay. I think one thing to note with this is you've got the base who are very circulatory, like they're very on the ball, ticking it, making things tick. The 8s are very much the receivers in this team. So their movement is very much based on...
Quickly, just to jump in on the 8s, do they stay this high? Or when we build up for the centre backs, do they drop like into kind of these positions just wide? Or do they stay quite high?
No, yeah, that's perfect as well. Yeah, they'll drop in, and then sometimes, if there's another thing that sometimes happens with the goalkeeper. So
sorry, I had to laugh at my pet error.
So with so if you want to put the goalkeeper back and make this back 3 more narrow, now the back 3 centre backs.
Let me just remove that one.
Yeah. So that's obviously that's the like 4-2 shape. That's like the original sort of like really deep in possession. Once you then start to sustain the ball and the goalkeeper's back in goal, you then have this part. So that's very narrow, that 5. So even the pivot, like you say, like you've got all of those, they were very close together. So now you'll see Caicedo and Palmer basically dropping in all the way out on the touchline to receive the ball. So like deeper, but a lot deeper though. Yeah, like there. So like they're coming into these gaps to receive because this is where the space is, because like you've got those wingers still high and wide. They're pinning the opposition fullbacks.
So the wingers stay wide even though these 2 drop wide.
Yeah, but higher. So to keep
higher than I already have them.
No, about there, about where you've got them. Yeah.
Okay, but like, so just as a jump in question, like presumably very few teams will have their line here, right? When we have the ball there, not many teams will have their line here. They will probably push up a little bit higher. So like because obviously that's what they're going to try to do, right? To not give us that space. Obviously, they will be scared of in behind, but at the same time, if they want to stop us, they need to have their numbers up as well. And the only way they can achieve that is to push up as a team, right? So then don't these people start standing in each other's ways, or is there any scenario in which, like, say, the wingers invert, or do these like you know what I mean? What I'm asking?
So usually the height, I get what you mean, like in terms of like they look close together, but the height will depend on where the defensive line is. So as I said, the wingers will be as high as they possibly can, and they will be literally playing on the shoulder. Like they'll be trying to force the fullbacks to take steps backwards rather than allowing them to play that high line. So then what you'll have, so say as you have it right now, if it was like that, then the wide, like Caicedo, would be even deeper, because like that's where the space is. So you're playing in that space between the two.
Okay. So
and that's where you can receive.
And it almost looks like wing backs.
Yeah, but then that's the thing. They wouldn't both do it at the same time. So
okay, interesting. So where would say Palmer does it? Where would then Caicedo be? Like,
he would be basically and then Jackson may also drop. So then you basically got there like your two centrals, like and then so sort
and then you've got these like doing like let me do an arrow again.
They are like the wingers very much are the high. They're going to pin the opposition in. This is why I don't really.
Do they make those runs a bit like Salah and Mane used to for Liverpool?
Yeah, if the space is
or
there.
Or do they more like go down the line?
A bit of both, literally, because like I say, if the striker drops in to like link up play a bit, so this is something that Daka started to do a little bit, and especially Iheanacho actually, they drop in and like sort of form that little like pentagon in the middle. So then you've got the wingers, they can make those runs central because you've like that space has now been vacated, but again they can also make those runs in behind, like you say, touchline runs, and then that's when all those players in the middle can crash the box. So then your eights will attack, the striker will go back into the box, even one of your sixes may make a darting run towards the edge of the box. So it's very like fluid in that sense of who's going to make what run. But the idea obviously is like making the correct movements and being able to like manipulate the space. So like I said earlier, like Caicedo, where he positions himself on the pitch to receive the ball, Maresca wants his players to have this high IQ and understanding of, if the ball's over that side of the pitch, where can I stand? Where am I best suiting my team where I can receive the ball, but also drag players away from other areas of the pitch? So like these, like I say earlier, like with if the 8 drops a bit wider, the reason they're dropping there is because that's where the space is. That's where you can get at teams. So some games that will be there. Some games the space will be a bit higher up. So it really depends on each game as you go. But yeah, that's sort of the nooks and crannies of that sort of thing with the 8s. The 8s are very important, and I describe the 8s as the receivers in this sort of system.
Yeah, it is very interesting. I do want to involve Charlie in this as well. I do have a couple of more questions, because a few of the problems that I have like noticed when I've did some reading up or whatever, and listened to other people's opinion how things could line up, I have seen a trend that there's no way all of the big money signings we've made will all be able to play. You can see now there's no Mudryk here, there is no Sterling here, and there is also, well, I guess the other ones are less so drastic, but there's also no Gusto here. So my first question is Caicedo here purely because he's not as good as Enzo here, or is this actually a position that could help Caicedo thrive, in your opinion?
I think Caicedo is there mainly because you want Enzo deeper, but Caicedo could do that deeper role as well. So I think something that sort of stood out at Leicester was the reason he played Ndidi in that 8 role, which is now what we're saying Caicedo will do, is because Ndidi doesn't have that technical quality on the ball to receive it. I'm not saying he's bad, obviously, but like compared to other players, he'd rather have more technically astute players in that area so that you can bait the press and hold on to the ball for longer, because like putting their foot on the ball. Whereas Ndidi, if he did that, he's not quite as technically astute. He might mess up, make a poor touch, and then they're on the break. Whereas Caicedo, he's not like that. Like Ndidi, he is technically very astute. So you could quite easly put him there. And
but is the main reason for putting Ndidi there, was that for the counter press when they lose the ball, or was the reason just, well, he's half decent, but he's not good enough at the base, so I put him somewhere else?
Yeah, I think it's pretty much the mixture of those two things. I think he's a decent enough player that you want him in the team, and you know that on the counter press, like you say, having one player in those 8s, at least one of them that is a hard worker. It's just so happened for them they also have Dewsbury Hall, who again is like a bit of an engine, so he's also good for that. But you need at least one of those players to be really intense for the counter press and when they go, and also they can trigger the press for you. So a lot of the time I found that with watching Leicester, it's not actually the striker that really triggers the press. It was more Ndidi or Dewsbury Hall. So when one of those goes, that's when
off the ball I heard there would be quite a lot of almost like a 4-4-2. Is that true?
Yeah, a bit of a 4-4-2, a bit of a 4-1-4-1. I found is how I sort of described it a bit more. So you'd have like winks.
4-1. Okay,
yeah,
because
like
what I heard is that one of the 8 usually joins the striker in the counter press, but I guess it could be one like those.
That does, yeah. If that happens, that's when it becomes a 4-4-2. So say Caicedo pushes up alongside Jackson, and Enzo will step up alongside.
Yeah. Well, presumably more likely Palmer than to push up.
Yeah.
And then
vice versa, that's
you create this one again, and then these two obviously fall. I have another question. So if we're doing it as a base right off of, let's have it back to the same base that we had earlier. Obviously, to try and think of other possibilities, that is kind of what he did at Leicester. The right back inverts, then on one of the two starting sixes pushes up into an 8 role, and then you have your 3-2-5. But what are the other options? Because obviously for Reece James, I think this could be very much beneficial. But I think there's also the argument to be made that Cucurella, first of all, has experience doing it, and Cucurella has more of the right kind of aggression. At least as a right back, I feel like Reece James loves to stand off sometimes because he's so strong and quick enough that works for him. But I feel like if you're asking him in an inverted midfield role or in an inverted fullback role that goes into midfield, and you're asking that aggression from him, I'm not sure if you're going to get it the way you want it, and you would get it from a Cucurella. So there's obviously, we all know how great Reece James crossing is. We all know that he's also a goal threat. So how would things work if we kind of let them or you can obviously replace James with Gusto as well. And even though you say Gusto can also be absolutely thrive under in the inverted role, I do still feel like at Chelsea, as much as we're changing things drastically now, our biggest successes over years have come when we've had very good overlapping fullbacks. Do you see any scenario in which we still have that? And if so, how would that play out?
So, firstly on Cucurella, definitely invert. That is something you can definitely do. And again, with that, there's not much that has to change. Reece would be the right centre back. The starting right centre back would become the central centre back, and then the left centre back would be the left centre back. So Colwill would shift over, and he'd actually be the one left centre back, and Reece would be the right centre back.
If you want to, you can also obviously play it around. Let Enzo be the one that pushes up, and these two obviously defend it. If you wanted to do that. And another question for me, and another worry for me, is also Nkunku, because you've put him here on the wing now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I know you say a lot of people underrate what Nkunku can do on the wing, and I don't even necessarily disagree with that. But I do think the way we've hyped up Nkunku, the way that Nkunku, the reasons he's been brought in to be a decider and the deciding factor in the team. And I just don't think most of the game staying wide screams Nkunku at all. So obviously, please tell me why I'm wrong if you think I'm wrong. But 2 questions. First of all, do you think we could end up seeing Nkunku play up front? And also, a little bit less likely, but also, could you see a scenario in which Nkunku plays as the 8? Or do you see that as an impossible situation?
No, I actually think so. I'll start it off with saying Nkunku, for me, the reason I'm so willing to put him on the left over other players is I think he's the most, other than Reece, he's probably the most technically versatile and tactically versatile player we have, in the sense that I think you can get pretty much what you want out of his skill set anywhere you put him in that front 5. I think even if you put him off the right, people wouldn't like it. But if you asked him to do something, you know what you're going to get from Nkunku, because I think he's that flexible. I think when you're talking about getting the best out of him, I actually think his best role would be in the 8, pretty much where Palmer would be in the 8 as well. I think that is where he'd thrive most, being the receiver.
But could you have
him
and Palmer as 8 in the same game? Or would it have to be one or the other?
I think it'd have to be one or the other, in which case Palmer then maybe becomes a right winger, which again, I don't think you're getting the most. And this is why I sort of defaulted to Nkunku on the wing.
Palmer right wing works if instead of inverting Cucurella, you let Reece overlap, right? So you could then have Caicedo and Enzo as your base, keep that way, leave Cucurella as the left centre back, let Reece overlap. That allows Palmer to push inside and almost become the right 10. And I know then you still can't really have Nkunku as the left 10. I know that is still a problem. But my worries are just that either Nkunku or Mudryk, and I know Mudryk is obviously a different level, and there's absolutely an argument made that we don't want him as such high, responsibility anyway. But if the sporting directors, they will want their big money players all finding a way to be successful, and that's the part I worry about. I don't see how Mudryk and Nkunku and Palmer all work in the same team unless you put Nkunku up front, and then obviously that's Jackson done for. Especially, we cannot forget, the rumors are that we are looking to sign a striker. So what on earth are we going to do?
I think the way you've got it now, by the way, is if you was to ask me how do I think you get the best out of this team and the profiles you've got, I genuinely think pretty much what you've done on screen is what I've said from the get-go. I think that is the best way, because then you still have Caicedo and Enzo as a pivot. My only thing with that is that I haven't seen it from Maresca to the point that I can predict that that's what he's going to do, which is why I'm insistent at the minute that he's going to invert a fullback. But it's very, very viable that Enzo and Caicedo, he sees them as the perfect men for that pivot, because Caicedo offers that defensive balance. He can get up and down. Enzo's good on the ball. Caicedo's also very good on the ball. And then, like you say, you can have your right back provide the width. Palmer can start on the right, which means you can get him in the same team as Nkunku as your 2 10s. They're literally, if you could choose 2 10s at Chelsea to play alongside each other, there they are. That's your 2 10s.
Yeah. Oh, we've lost Connor's connection. So
that is the 2 10s.
That is the 2 10s. Connor is back. Connor, before I let you continue that point, because Charlie needs to head off in a second. I do apologize, Charlie. I haven't brought you in much in the last.
It's all good. It's nice to listen.
Very good. Like when you listen to this, are there a few things that make you a bit more optimistic, and that just seems to be, because we could have never done any of this with Poch, because there was no clear instruction. You go there, you go there, you go there. This is what happens. This is how the shapes will move around when you do that, and when you do this. Is this something that you can or want to get behind? And if Reece is too injury prone, you can happily change his name to Gusto, and it will be fine. It won't make much of a difference in that case. But Charlie, just your thoughts on what we've discussed mostly.
Look, I think at the end of the day, it's clear that he's perhaps got stronger tactical ideas than Pochettino. Let's see. I mean, it's all very well everyone saying that he's well suited to the squad. I get that, but until he's actually through the door and he's working with it, and we see it in a few games, like we're not really going to know. The tactics in theory, sound good. The principles of play sound good. Like the roles that certain players are potentially going to take up under him, this all sounds very good, and it's going to work well for some players, and it's not going to work as well for others. That's just the way it goes. But I think ultimately, we can talk about how he's going to set up his principles, his ideas, but until we see him get through the door and work with the players, and we see it in game, it's very hard to tell how it's going to be and how it's going to work out. You would expect it to work out. You'd expect it to be better than it was at Leicester, because he's working with better players. But then on the flip side of that, at Leicester, he was not at all coming up against any teams that are actually better than them, really. Whereas with Chelsea, you are going to come up against teams that are better with you. How's that system of play going to work when you're playing against better teams? Are you going to refuse to have a plan B? Even when things are blatantly not going well. These are all things we need to find out. Look, it's certainly exciting in the term that, we know that we've got players that are going to suit the roles. Maresca defends high. Fofana and Colwell, they've got pace as defenders. So, they've got that recovery speed, which without facing Vestergaard didn't have at Leicester, which is why they conceded so many of the same goal, getting hit on the counter-attack, because those centre-backs didn't have the pace to get back. So maybe, that might not happen as much at Chelsea. I think the midfield is going to be key as well. I think Caicedo can definitely perform that box-to-box role. Enzo in a deep role would be better. Palmer would be interesting to see in that kind of Dewsbury Hall role, and being at the game when Leicester played us in the FA Cup quarter-final. Dewsbury Hall was outstanding. He's definitely a Premier League quality footballer. But again, I think if you were to be bold per se and put Palmer in an 8 role, then people need to accept that his output is going to be less, in terms of goals. But in terms of assists, you could see him get more assists, and you could see him actually become more of a creative player rather than a goal scorer. He'll still get goals, but obviously perhaps not to the same level he did this season just gone. But you could certainly see him becoming, I don't want to compare him to De Bruyne as such, but you could see him becoming kind of a version of him, playing from slightly deeper and creating a lot more goals from deep. I think the interesting one is Nkunku, because as Connor said, Maresca likes a centre forward to kind of drop deep and link play. Now, Nkunku can definitely do that. That probably suits Jackson quite well as well. I think that suits his attributes. And that's why it also makes it very interesting to see what sort of striker we're going to go for. Because normally speaking, before this Maresca appointment, I would have said we had a penalty box poacher that's just going to be there to put the ball in the net. Someone like Haaland-esque. Obviously, we're not going to get Haaland, but someone that's just there. He's not going to touch the ball much. When they do touch the ball, they're going to be in the right place at the right time. And generally speaking, it's going to go in the back of the net. Now, I'm not sure if a striker like that suits the Maresca style of play from what we've been discussing. So it's going to be interesting, for example, with Maresca and how he likes to play. Does it make sense to go and splash out over £100 million and break your wage structure on a Victor Osimhen? I'm not sure an Osimhen suits a Maresca way of playing. I haven't watched enough of Sesko, but would a Benjamin Sesko be more suited to this way of playing? Would a Gyökeres be more suited to this way of playing? So, it's important that we don't do what we've done in the past and just go for a name. We need to go for someone that's actually going to suit the way that we play. And that's why, for me, I'm not sure if Osimhen would be right. But it's certainly interesting, mate. And I think there's definitely, potential for this to go well. But there's also potential that, it might not. So I think what we need to do is Maresca just needs to get the basics right. We need to see basic shape and that sort of thing. Players buying in. It's going to take a while. We're not going to see it instantly. It's going to take a few months for us to start to see it. But in theory, it sounds good. But of course, football's not played on paper and tactics boards. It's played on the pitch. So until you actually see the players out there, you're not really going to know how it works. You're not going to really know how he matches up to this group of players. And as we said at the top, mate, it's still a huge gamble at the end of the day.
It is. But also, like we said, who wouldn't have been a huge gamble? That is kind of part of the problem.
Charlie, for sure.
Charlie, I know you need to go, so thank you very, very much for coming on and sharing your thoughts initially on even the appointment itself compared to Poch, and also now in a bit of a tactical point of view. We appreciate it, and we hope to see you soon, bro.
No problem at all. Cheers, lads. Take care. Nice one, boys.
Thanks so much. Everybody make sure you subscribe to Charlie's channel. Link is down in the description.
Cheers, boys. Cheers.
Do check that out. Thanks, Charlie. We'll see you soon. Connor, I'll stick with you for a few more minutes. First of all, what did you make of that kind of question, I suppose, that Charlie put out there? Do you think that an Osimhen suits us less under someone like Maresca than he would have done under Poch? Or, because I assume you clearly like Osimhen, you clearly think it could be a benefit to us, but do you think less of a benefit to us under Maresca than it would have been under Poch? Or maybe potentially even more so, less? How do you feel about that one?
I agree on paper that because the striker does at times drop in, Osimhen maybe doesn't fit the bill completely, but I think that's why I like Jackson for that. And I think you've already got Nkunku as well, who can do that role. So I think if you're going to sign a striker this summer, like the ideas of like Gyökeres and these players, for me, I wouldn't go near them. And I rate Gyökeres so highly. I said when he left Coventry that he was going to be very good. I thought a lot of Premier League clubs should have been in for him. So it's nothing to do with not rating him. I rate him extremely highly. But I think Jackson is of that mould. I think he's a worse version of Gyökeres currently, and he's got time. So I would keep Jackson of that mould. If you're going to go for a striker, you do go for a box-dominant striker just because of what it offers the squad that we don't have. So imagine an Osimhen.
Box-dominant, or is he just tall?
I think he's a bit of a... He's box-dominant in the sense, like you say, he's tall and he's good in the air and he knows where to be. He's clever with his movement in the box. I wouldn't say he's such a bully to the point of like a Osimhen or something like that, but it would make a lot of sense. Sesko, if I was to put a prediction down now, I think Sesko's the one we get, just because I feel like the board are in love with that sort of deal. I feel it just screams to me that the board make that deal. They love that. It just
pisses me off again, because in January we could have had him for 43 million. Now he's going to cost 55, and we already didn't have a striker in January. So what? Obviously, I know the books, so that's always the problem. But again, just sign 3 less 16-year-olds, and you could have easily signed Sesko. It's just. It's just so silly. I saw someone there, Robinson, that says, why can't Nkunku be that dynamic number 9? Jackson can play more as a left side forward or left wing. Do you see that as a potential? Who do I need to bring in? I guess I'll take Mudryk out, bring Maresca back in. If you then had Nkunku up front, you had Jackson on the left, I guess Palmer as the 10, Maresca on the right. Do you think that's possible as a solution?
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
I feel like Nkunku just isn't like asking Nkunku to make runs down the line to cross it. I think you're wasting a lot of what. I'm not saying Nkunku can't do that, but I'm saying you're not getting everything you could get out of Nkunku out of him. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I would play Nkunku. Like, that's another option for me. Nkunku through the middle. Like, the only reason I didn't really go for it too much is because, one, I really like Jackson. Like, I think he's got levels to his game to go up, and I think he plays a big part. I think Maresca will like him a lot.
But to be fair, I'm not taking Jackson out of the team. I'm just putting him on the left instead.
And again, that's something I mentioned. This was in my Zerbi video, not my Maresca video. But I did mention the idea of Jackson on the left and Nkunku as a striker, because I think that does suit. You get Nkunku attacking the box, Jackson in 1v1 isolations. I think he's so progressive with his, like, how he carries the ball. I think he'd actually be really good out there, and he's done it before at Villarreal and coming through the youth rank. So again, that's very viable. There's so many profilings that we may actually see that surprise us this summer. I wouldn't be surprised if we see a few position changes in that sense, because Maresca is very key on that. Once he identifies what he wants from these roles, he will look at the squad and he'll think, who can provide me with the best possible, like, assets for that role. And he did that at Leicester so well. I think that's one of his biggest traits, is actually the ability to get the absolute most out of a player and cover their deficiencies quite well by having the correct players around them. So, like I say, deficiencies, for example, Enzo last season, you saw more of his deficiencies than his actual ability because of where he was positioned on the pitch. I think the difference here would be you'd see way more of his ability, and his deficiencies would actually be covered up by what's put around him to support him. So that goes for Nkunku, that goes for Jackson, that goes for everybody.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's another interesting one. Obviously, we have 2 left wingers in the squad, even if a lot of what we've been talking about so far had Nkunku or Jackson on the left. Obviously, Raheem Sterling's had his most, let me say, productive output under, the manager that everybody's saying Maresca is the B-Tech version of. So do you see at all a Raheem Sterling resurgence coming, especially because Raheem Sterling should, in theory at least, have better understanding of what Maresca is asking from all of them than any of the others have, purely because he already worked under not the same structure, but a manager that has somewhat similar ideas?
Yeah, I think there's a good chance Sterling starts on the left this season. If I was predicting what will happen, I would probably say he starts as that left winger, because, like you say, I think he's got a bit more tactical understanding, and he, unless he's sold, obviously, but I think he'll know him a bit better, and he'll know what he can offer because he's played under Pep. Like, I don't think they're there at the same time, but the point is he knows, like, what he's about. And he does offer good qualities in that role. My one issue would be, I think he slows the ball down too much. And I think when you get that ball out to that 1v1 isolation...
Also compared to Mudryk, or just compared to, say, Madueke?
Compared in what sense? Slowing the ball down?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he slows the ball down more than both of them, quite a lot. In terms of, especially on the counter, I think there's a lot of times where I want him to speed things up, and it, like I say, he slows it down, which again is, in some instances, the right decision. But a lot of the time, I feel like he sort of stops our counters. But again, this won't be counter-based football, so very different. He can definitely suit that role. I think he is the safe option to start there. And like you say, giving him these 1v1 isolations to beat his man and put balls into the box, something he can do. He can attack the back post if the ball's coming from the right side. Again, something he lived off at Man City, got most of his goals from this sort of poaching at the back post, making those clever runs from the wing. But I think Mudryk is the other one to watch out for. So I had this conversation with somebody yesterday, I think. Sterling maybe starting the season, because I think Mudryk is, like you've said earlier as well, tactically maybe not as switched on as the rest of them, and he needs direction. So I could see Mudryk not really starting and not really getting many minutes to begin with until he's been given the direction needed by Maresca. And I think
until Maresca believes he gets it, I guess. Yeah,
and that's where I think next season, probably for more than any player, I think Mudryk's next season is pivotal, because I think it's so 50-50 in the way that if he gets this system and he fits exactly what Maresca wants him to do, he can literally flourish in that role. Like, that is the perfect role for Mudryk. I said it with the Zerbi, because that, again, it's a similar thing, isolating those wingers out wide. That's exactly what you want from Mudryk.
Just to quickly maybe explain this to people. So the Zerbi does less of the making the goalkeeper create a back four, right? And another difference, I think the Zerbi leaves mostly 4 rather than 5. Is that true?
Against lower opposition, they end up with like a 3-1-6 more than the 3-2-5. But again, they do build up.
But the base is still a 3-2-5 for him as well.
Yeah, and even in deeper build up, it's actually a 4-2-4 essentially, with the 10 and the striker as a 2 strikers /10s, and then the wingers they stay the same. The winger principles are very similar from De Zerbi to
but the
Maresca.
Fullbacks can be different.
Yeah, the fullbacks are joining in with the build up, like it pretty much how they set up.
You'd almost have if it was
like
the
that,
you could also have this,
Yeah, and even the 10 and the striker are a bit deeper. They make the box, and then the 2 wingers are the height of the team. So like that. But again, the winger principles, like I said, are the same. Like they're your highest men, they're your outlets, they're the ones that you want to play towards one side of the pitch, and then when you can isolate the other one on the other side of the pitch, play that big switch over, and then they've got a 1v1 with their fullback. This is perfect for Mudryk because you're giving him that confidence to beat his man and make something happen. But as I said, I think it's so 50-50 this year, because if he gets it and he clicks, he becomes one of the perfect players for this system. If it doesn't click this season, big questions will start being asked under multiple managers. Is he just not good at taking on information? Because if Maresca doesn't use him in a system that suits him, my conclusion would be he just doesn't take on the information that he's being told very well. I think that would be an issue in itself. So I'm I really hope it clicks for Mudryk this year, because I rate his tool set, and I think his actual ability as a winger, an out-and-out direct winger, I think he has everything. But again, if he can't do it to the role, to what is expected of him, then what's the point in having the tool set? So this is a big season for Mudryk.
Exactly. No, I do agree. What we can see on screen, a goalkeeper that at parts will even become part of a back four. So that's how much it will be involved in build up, that he essentially becomes a centre back in possession. So that clearly highlights a drastic need for a new goalkeeper, because Petrovic, that just isn't his strength. I know some people have been talking about he already has improved with the ball at his feet this season. First of all, I think it needs to be clear, Petrovic isn't as young as people make him out to be. He is 24. He's not that young. Now, sure, can he get better with his feet? I'm sure he can. Everybody can get better at everything. But there's a certain base talent that you have or don't have. And his strength just isn't ball playing. Now, with Robert Sanchez, you could argue that he does have certain ball playing strengths. But I think this season has proven that it's very much a liability, in the sense that it might work, but it's almost a 50-50 chance of whether some of his passing goes directly to the opponent and you concede straight away. Ask Declan Rice about it. Or it works. And that tells me we need a new goalkeeper.
Do you want to hear my worry with this one? Because I've said this I've been on a few podcasts and a few videos since this Maresca move dropped. One of my biggest worries with Maresca coming in is, do you know who I think fills that role, unfortunately?
Kepa.
Yep. And that scares me a lot.
Because Kepa isn't good enough as a goalkeeper, or you also don't think he's good enough as a ball player?
I think the reason he gets in the team, and I think the reason that he has a chance to be picked, is because he is good enough and he can make those passes. But then that doesn't matter when he's so susceptible to long shots. He's just not a good enough shot stopper in that sense. He's with long shots, like we said, his arms, he just never gets to them. He was hurting us so much, teams started to target that aspect of our game. So my biggest worry would be that he takes a look at Kepa in pre-season, realises you're probably the most suited to this role of the 3 goalkeepers I've got here available. So if we don't make a signing, I think he chooses Kepa. So let's just hope, let's keep our fingers crossed that we do end up going in for a goalkeeper, because otherwise...
Or that we get a decent offer for Kepa, because as we know, the sporting directors and owners don't care what the manager wants. So Maresca might say, I'm playing Kepa. And the sporting directors are like, no, you're not, we're selling him. So that could also happen.
Yeah.
But do you have any sort of names floating about in your head of goalkeepers that we could potentially look at?
The two
as inverted goalkeeper. Do you have any goalkeeper names that we could be looking at? There's a rumor flying about that we have asked for the conditions on Villarreal goalkeeper Philip Jurgensen. Not necessarily the best outlet, so I wouldn't put too much on that yet. But thoughts on potential goalkeepers?
Yeah, so Jurgensen's one of them that I need to do more research on. I haven't really watched loads of them this season, so I need to watch a bit more of him. The other one is the Las Palmas goalkeeper they're looking at. Again, haven't done much on him either this year. The two that I have done a bit more work on and that I do like for Chelsea are Bolka, obviously from here originally anyway, so another mess up in the Cobham factory where we didn't let them progress here anyway. But again, would they have progressed if they went away? You never know. And the other one is Bento, who I like as well. So they're the two I'd be looking at.
What about Diego Costa? Because there are a few of them people in the chat are mentioning him. Thoughts on Diego Costa, or just too expensive?
Exactly that. I would bring him in a heartbeat. I think he again perfectly suits what you're asking to do, and he's probably a better shot stopper than most of those. But again, the money, I don't think you need to spend that amount of money on that position currently. And I think you like Bento and Bolka have the potential to be like good enough anyway, to the point where, I mean, they're good enough now, not even just potential, but they can get to that level of shot stopping as well, and they're good with their feet. So I think you can invest that money smarter in the goalkeeper position than Diego Costa. But again, I'm not going to complain. I think he's brilliant. So if they go and get him, absolutely amazing. But I don't think so.
There's now, I don't know if you know on Mamardashvili, Connor, but I've heard that Mamardashvili isn't the greatest with his feet. I don't know how true it is, but that I guess that takes him kind of out of the running to some extent. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I think he's not as good as the rest of them with his feet. I'd say Costa's definitely the one out of those two that you pick. But again, he's a good shot stopper, and he's got a lot of suitors for that reason. But yeah, I think probably not quite to the level that you'd need to step into that back four.
Fair dues. What other position do you think we urgently need strengthening in on this pitch? Now, obviously, we've had Fofana here the whole time, and Fofana is all well and good if fit. But the thing is, first of all, we don't know if he will be fit. And the even bigger question is, after spending of the last 3 years, spending 2.5 of those 3 being injured, how good will he even be when finally coming back, right? That is a question we just don't have the answer to. So we certainly need a centre-back, probably 2, especially if Chalobah also leaves. So centre-back and goalkeeper is kind of set in stone, really, that we need it. Striker, we've discussed. Now, supposedly, the club are looking at wingers. Initially, they were always talking about left-backs. Now, Richard Romano seems to be less sure about the left-back and more so that we are at least looking at wingers. I don't know if that's purely because the Olise story. I don't know if that's why he's saying looking at wingers. Wouldn't surprise me. But do you think we need a winger? I think if Sterling leaves, then we need a winger. If Sterling doesn't leave, do we need a winger? Not really, I would say. No. So, and unless they're purely just trying to sign Olise for the sake of it, I don't really see why in our financial situation we're looking at a winger.
Yeah, I think it's not a necessity at all. I think the left back, I think we need a left back because
I think you sell Chilwell and you buy a left back if you.
Exactly that, because Chilwell doesn't fit this team. Cucurella does, but Chilwell doesn't. So you need somebody who's going to drop in, maybe a left centre back hybrid.
From Chilwell, you get more profit because Cucurella was only signed in 2022, and then signed for 60 million. So that's 2 years ago. So you divide 60 by. I think Cucurella alongside Sterling was signed before we came up with the idea of 7-8 year contract. So 5-year amortization. So you divide 60 by 5, it's 12. So you take 12 off that, 24 off that. So you're essentially still there with 36 million that, if you sell him, you need to make more than 36 million back to make any profit. Is anyone going to give us more than 36 million for Cucurella? Maybe. I doubt it, though. But with Ben Chilwell, you signed him for 50 million, so less, and you signed him in 2020 already, so only... Yeah, but it doesn't matter if he renewed, though. So it's about when you signed him, you amortize his transfer fee for the period of that initial contract. I don't think the remaining transfer fee, I don't think that gets extended and cut up into a new contract. I don't think that's how it works, but I could be wrong on this. Just the way I've understood it is you sign a player, you amortize their transfer fee for the initial contract signed. So that for him would be 5 years, 50 by 5 is 10 each. So because only like 1 year left on that, as far as I'm aware, without the obviously potential contract extension, you only have 10 million to cover to make profit. So if you sell Chile for 30, you make 20 million profit. If you sell Cucurella for 30, you make 6 million loss. So for why the club would ever consider in this current scenario selling Cucurella over Chilwell is baffling. The only thing is, is it possible to sell Chilwell to anyone with how injured he's been? Does anyone want him? That is maybe a different question. But yeah, it's a tricky one. One last question for you, Connor, before we wrap this one up. I would love for you to name me 2 or 3 from each, depending on how many you have thought of. I spoke about already that you told me about Enzo, Caicedo, Reece James and Gusto as well. So maybe if you want to keep it more interesting, name different ones. The biggest winners and losers you see in the current squad, and obviously not Chalaban, Gallagher, who will be sold. Under Maresca, because that's what I think is one of the most interesting ones. Because for me, I fear that at least one of these 3 will end up being one of the biggest losers. And I don't want that to happen to any of those 3, to be honest.
Yeah. So I'll start off with one that you've already said, but and then I'll go on to a few different ones. Enzo, for me, is absolutely the biggest winner. I think you're going to see the absolute best out of him, and I think this is perfect for him. So I won't even go into too much detail about that one, but I think genuinely the one to watch is him, because it suits him down to the ground. Another winner, in my opinion, is Madueke. I think he's going to absolutely love Madueke, Maresca. Again, this comes down to if we sign an Elise, maybe he doesn't get the minutes, but I think if Madueke goes
if we sign Elise, he will love Elise instead. But Elise is not as much of a wide winger as Madueke is he?
Yeah, and that's the thing. That's why I think he'll love Madueke. He will do everything he's told in this system. He will hug the width. He will when he gets the ball, he will go direct. He's one of the most direct wingers in the league. He'll go 1v1. And I've been saying this to a lot of people lately as well. The right-sided winger, if the right back is inverting, usually has more defensive responsibility than the left-sided winger. So in this sense, it would be Madueke. I think towards the end of the season, massive credit to Poch on this. I think Madueke become a very good defensive outlet for Chelsea. I think he was actually putting in big defensive shifts because of Poch. If he keeps that mindset, I think Maresca will love him for that role exactly for that reason, in the same way he loved Fatuwu for that role for that exact reason. So I think Madueke could be one of the biggest winners if he starts the season.
Can Mudryk be that, or do you not see Mudryk? Because I think in principle Mudryk can do exactly the same as Madueke in that sense, because Mudryk is also fairly physical. His ground duel stats are probably some of the best stats across this season. So for me, if you give Mudryk the confidence to actually take people on, I think he can do exactly that. And then it's a question of, does Maresca want it on both sides or just on one?
Yeah, and he does want it on both sides if you can get it out of them. Maybe not the defensive output as much. Usually that's the one. I mean, he'll like them both to defend to a competent level, but the one on the inverting side does naturally have a bit more to do. But again, like I said, with Mudryk, this role is so tailored to him and his exact skill set. But as I said before, my only drawback on it is how quickly does he grasp it, and does he grasp it? If he does, I think he literally takes this team to another. I think he takes that role as his own, because I do think he is the perfect suitor for that role. But let's see how quickly, and if at all, he clicks with Maresca, because like I said, tactically, that's the one sort of thing with Mudryk. We don't know how good he is at taking on these instructions.
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting one, and very much so possible, of course. Who else could you see potentially as the biggest loser under Maresca?
So the biggest loser I've always
had. Or do you even see such a thing quite clearly? Sorry?
Chilwell is the biggest loser, in my opinion. He just doesn't fit the team. There's no real role for Chilwell. He can't play the left centre-back. He can't really invert. And if you're going to play him, to be honestly, as much as people are going to hate this, the only place you can play Chilwell in the system is the left winger. And again, that's not going to happen. That's the only place you can play him. He doesn't fit the other two. So that's what you'd see. And again, the only other thing you could say is, like you said with Reece, is if they do slightly switch, he plays as the left back, but as providing width. But again, I think another left back. I think he's the biggest loser of this appointment. In terms of another loser, I think I agree with you. I think somebody like Nkunku, but I don't necessarily think he's a loser in the fact that he'll get dropped or he'll get he won't be in the team. I think he will be played, but I just don't know if he's a winner in the sense of, is he going to get used to his absolute maximum potential?
That's why I just hope we'll find a way to use him somewhat other than the wing, because I also just don't see Nkunku as, even if you play him on the wing, I don't think he's that type of winger like a Madueke at all. So if that's what Maresca wants, I would honestly be surprised if he ever plays Nkunku on the wing, because I don't think you're going to get that kind of wing play from Nkunku, unless you disagree. But just for me anyway.
I think you can get a bit of it from him, but again, it's not his best role. I think he'll do it. And he'll do it to a good level, but I think you can get a lot more from him in a central area, of course.
Absolutely. I mean, you've mentioned it. The chat's mentioned it. Carney Chukwuemeka, of course, could do the Nkunku role, could do the Palmer role.
Big winner.
Carney Chukwuemeka could be fantastic if fit in this system. I think, is the Zazi worth a mention as someone to lose out? Because you've not even put him on the thing. So that's you're not exactly banking on him very much.
Yeah. I think he is a loser. I didn't even think to mention him. Again, that says it all, really, doesn't it? I think if you're going, you want Fofana as your right centre-back, and then if you was to say a second one, you'd say Chalobah, but he's probably going. And then if you was to say a third one, you'd say, well, we need a signing. You wouldn't then put Disasi there. So, I think that's exactly right. I don't think he really suits... Because like Leicester fans have said, like even Maresca said himself, and you can see it just by watching the games, their biggest worries come defending transitions. That's not Disasi's forte. He's going to have the ball going over his head into the channel. He's going to have to retreat and play recovery defence as the right centre-back a lot of the time. Is he good enough at defending wide areas like that? Absolutely not. He's not the player you want there. So, the only place you could really see him is a central centre-back. But again, I don't think they sell him, but I don't think he gets a lot of game time unless he really impresses as that central centre-back in pre-season and he likes his physicality. That's maybe one thing that he'll like because it's a bit different to what we've got in the squad. But if I was to make a call on it, it would definitely be a loser, yeah.
There you go. I just quickly want to read out something that a Leicester fan said to The Athletic, and I'm reading it out to you because I want you to tell people why it's not necessarily the full truth, because people, and I understand why the Athletic are doing it for the headline, and I also understand the representation, but you cannot ask a fan of a club that didn't even know how to spell ball possession before this season, let alone that want to make themselves feel better about why it's not a bad thing that they're losing their manager. Because if you're them, obviously you're going to try to make yourself feel a bit better. But they've said, is he a pragmatic manager that we might need next season back in the Premier League? Absolutely not. He has one way of playing. He's unflinching and unwavering in it. No matter who you play, whether you're winning or losing, he won't change. Enzo Maresca, before a game, is very good at setting a team up to go into a game and doing X, Y, and Z. His in-game management, though, a lot of managers outthought him tactically within games. And that's in the Championship, don't forget. He needs to learn quickly. You have less leeway in the Premier League, and there is an inexperience there. What do you think about that comment? I got it on WhatsApp, that's why I can't bring it up on screen now. But what do you make of those comments from that Leicester fan?
I think, I think people see these in two different lights. I think they see that the formation stays this, the way they're playing stays the same. They want to keep the ball and they want to move the opponent about. So his principles do stay the same. So I think that's where a lot of people, their eyes go to that and they're like, oh, we're not changing things. We should be going a bit faster. We should be doing this. We should be doing that. But the actual changes within a system, he does do. Like I think I mentioned.
Can you maybe, so I can explain the changes that could happen in such a scenario that say you're losing or whatever else that could just drag them around to
this is gonna, I'll put it out there. This is gonna look a bit, people are gonna be wow when you see this, but bear with it. So you got the two centre backs, Colwill, Fofana. They'll be the two as the base, yeah. The goalkeeper and goal, two at the base. Then you've got, say, Enzo, so like whoever Winks was for them, and Cucurella, so the left-sided defender.
Okay.
Would go inside as like the left centre back.
Yeah.
The right back, this where it would become basically a 10. So you
basically, how far do these two split apart, the centre backs in this scenario? Do they go wide and the two midfielders stay narrow?
Yeah, basically a bit wider, and then they're the two in the middle, and then you got the two width holders, the striker, and then you've got basically 3 number 8s / 3 number 10s. So it's almost a 2-2-5-1. Okay.
Obviously,
So
we're talking higher. In possession here, so in a realistic world, this would probably be a bit like this. But that is obviously an interesting one. It's certainly a change. I've also seen like that. I've seen this masterclass video where he says, well, if we play against the midfield 3, we have 4, so we're outmanned already. We are outmanning them already. Fantastic. But if they play a 4 and we want to outman them, he uses the striker to drop deep. Now, obviously, in this case, you'd already have outmanned them with 5, like in a different way. But does he ever obviously, we've talked about how Nkunku isn't like your clear out-and-out winger as such. But if you then put Nkunku in the wing, in a game where things maybe aren't fully working for you, ignore Mudryk here now, by the way, guys. Could you see a Mudryk going out there and then you almost like change it, and then all of a sudden in possession he makes starting runs here, and then the left 8 all of a sudden goes wide to create the width there? Is that something he will do, or will his wingers, no matter what, stay wide until they get the ball, obviously?
I think it depends on personnel. Like you say, I think he's not really had an Nkunku type player to experiment with, so I don't think we've truly
That's the tricky part, isn't it? Like, that's what makes it so difficult to predict everything that's going to happen, because his level of play is his Championship and Palmer.
Yeah, he's working with his exact skill, the set of players which he's got, which is, again, something that I give him a lot of credit for. I think he's so good at squeezing exactly what he wants out of the players that he's got. So, again, at Chelsea, that goes up another level. You've got so much in this squad that he'll like. It just depends how he uses them. I've not seen, from the games I've watched, and bear in mind, this is what now? I think 11 90s I've watched now of Leicester since I've started doing this process. So, again, not every game. But
do you watch, if you've watched the full 90 like that, do you watch it on normal speed? Do you put it on like 1.5?
No, normal speed.
First. Yeah. Connor's just got too much time with his hands, I think.
This is what I do. This is what I'm trying to make my job. So this is is my But yeah, that's from what I see from those, the wingers are the wingers. They will stay in that role. But again, that's because that's what they're good at. And whether now he has a bit more in his arsenal, in the sense of maybe we put Nkunku there, he can become a second 10, a second or 9 at times. Exactly. So wouldn't be surprised if he makes those changes. He's definitely tactically able to make those changes. He has the mind for it. So I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing new innovations. But yeah, from what I've seen so far, the wingers are the wingers. Fair dues.
So it will be very, very interesting how things do pan out, how they end up going. Someone said earlier, Pice has just tweeted what we already looked at earlier, or what we said earlier. Chelsea have started looking at goalkeepers already, and have contacted the representatives of Philip Jørgensen. Judging by the name, I assume he's Swedish, but I don't know.
I think he's Danish.
Oh, is he? Okay. Jørgensen.
Might be wrong. Somebody correct me in the chat if they know.
Somehow he's Danish and Swedish.
Oh.
So he is born in Sweden, but a Danish youth international. So, I guess we're both right.
Yeah.
But he's born in Sweden and has seemingly both nationalities, so that is interesting. But yeah, I don't know, man. He's 22. I don't like the beard, so I don't like the beard. Get rid of that, Philip, and then we could talk. But yeah, it's been a very interesting one. I think it's been a very interesting few days. Like a couple of days ago, I was at the stage where I'm like, I don't really care who you're giving us as a manager. It doesn't really matter anyway. And over the last 2 days, I felt myself get roped in like I did with Sarri. And I'm not saying he's necessarily like Sarri, but that's like, I know Tuchel did it, but with Tuchel, the tactics just weren't that fun. Not for me anyway. And maybe for other people are, but for me, sure, there was a lot of tactical nuance to it. But I was like, it still meant Havertz, Mount, and Werner up front. Do you know what I mean? So it wasn't that fun. And now I feel more like into that Sarri way, but I also we've experienced Sarri, and we know Chelsea fans don't like that. So that already pisses me off again, that they don't care they don't care. Like, first they give us Potter, where not many Chelsea fans were unhappy with, directly after sacking a Champions League winning manager. Then you give us a Spurs legend, and now you're giving us a very, not tactically one-way horse, but still a little bit, more so than a Poch, more so than a Tuchel, right? Also, I think that historically, Chelsea fans have not been the biggest fans of. So there's a little bit of concern, a little bit of excitement, a little bit of what I hate now is I really just want to see what flipping happens. But first I have to sit through Euro, where something completely different will be going on. And then I have to hope and pray that Gusto and Enzo don't go to the Olympics. And then I also have to hope that not all of these players that we're currently talking about all end up being injured before the season even starts, because that's also very much a possibility. So yeah, it's a tough one, very difficult, because a few people recently told me about I don't know. How do I say it? It doesn't matter. Let's talk about that on another day, because the Conference League final is starting as well. So, let's not keep people for too long. We might be having to think about it, because we might be there next year. Where's that final going to be? Somewhere randomly in Poland, I think. Not even in Warsaw, not like the capital, just some random town. So brilliant. Fantastic competition. Cheers, City. Cheers for bottling it. We appreciate it. But ladies and gentlemen, we're going to wrap this one up. Please do, and really please do, check out Connor's channel. The link is down in the description. Connor Holden Football, as you can see on screen. He has just uploaded a more, I mean, we did look at it in quite a lot of detail here now, but he's explained it a bit better and a bit like, thought out in advance and in an edit rather than doing it live. So please do check out Connor's new video on Enzo Maresca and any other bits and bobs as well. I'm sure when we are seriously linked to other people, he will make videos about those as well. So do subscribe, hit the notification bell button on his channel to make sure you get notified on all those videos. Follow him on Twitter. Follow me on Twitter. Both links are down in the description and you can see it on screen as well. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, thank you guys for watching. Hit that subscribe button if we haven't done that yet. We finally got past the 18,000 subscribers, so that's nice. But, we want to get to 20. So please subscribe if you haven't done that just yet. Hit that like button for me as well. It would be massively appreciated. And yeah, thank you guys for watching. Up the Chelsea, upwards and onwards. I'm still going to keep the backwards and downwards for now, and we will see you next time.